Mm-hmm. That's weird. Alrighty, guys. So, as you guys know, there's an MMR test that was running for Dead by Daylight over the last couple weeks, actually. And they have pretty well fleshed out results here. Well, they don't give you any numbers, really. But they give you their take on what's happening and kind of give you objective numbers-ish. Take their word for it, numbers. Right off the bat, guys, something that they did wrong was not making people fill out a survey. There should have been a pop-out every time you finished a match that says, you know, the rate your match at the top of the screen that no one ever fucking does? That should have been a box that said rate your match, and then it should give you some free blood points for it. Every time you do it. With like five fill-in-the-choice bubbles. Something really easy, right? Now, the reason for that is what they're trying to do is make the game more fun. Fun being subjective. And if you look at their forums for the amount of feedback that they got, the amount of feedback they got for this test, it was almost nothing. Let's see if we can find it. Where the fuck is the response forum? Yeah, so you can't even go up a tier in to get out of the news section. That's funny. Matchmaking tests. If you look at the number of discussions they got here, while it seems like this is a lot, it's not. And not all of them are specifically about the test that day. Sometimes they're really just stupid shit. If you look at the amount of feedback they got, though, it's nothing. This is absolutely nothing. So, subjective feedback based purely on their forums here is next to nothing in terms of you have 40,000 people playing the game, you have 40 people that make threads. That is not nearly enough to be convincing. Yeah, like, I would not actually hold a candle to stats like this. Well, you might get people that just want free blood points. What you do in-game is you make it so the blood points aren't worth that much, but they still give people something back. This is a problem with servers in general. So, I have a degree in psychology, and one of the parts of psychology mainly has to do with stats and testing. A lot of psychology about stats and testing, making up methodology and different ways of assessing problems and figuring them out, and then making a test that will actually try to figure out what you're trying to test. In the case here, they basically have no reward, and they got almost no feedback for what they're attempting to do from a subjective standpoint, so how much fun people are having. If there's a little pop-up box that just popped out the moment you finish the match, of course there's people that are just going to fill shit out for free BP, right? That happens. But most people are willing to actually check a box, and as long as your questions are not too in-depth, and it's balanced a little bit with a reward, people are definitely willing to fill out the boxes and just check them off, right? Especially you could have made like a little keychain or something. I don't fucking know. People like the little ornaments, right? But they didn't. And I'm assuming that how was this match? How fun was this match at the top of the screen also did not have more feedback during this test, because it's still there. I think most people don't even notice it's there. It's still in the game. I think Overwatch is the same system where you can rate your games. But instead, if they actually had a way of getting feedback out of the game fresh from the matches, it would have helped them out a lot fucking more than what they did, which is they depended on their forums and maybe scouring Twitter. Also, one of the problems you have is if people are making informed posts here, like they take time to make this, there are probably also people that are like you get a very select portion of the player base that gives enough of a shit to come to the forums and actually make a post, and assumedly make a well thought out post, right? That's almost no one. Almost no one's willing to do this. They don't get any rewards for doing this. The only thing they get is maybe the game will be changed in a way that they want it to be changed, right? Oftentimes they won't do it, and then also you have to consider the fact that people that are coming here, the really sweaty tryhards that are willing to come to their forums to make a post, are also people that want the game done in like a certain way. They're willing to stack the deck in order to get what they want. If you have an informal pop-up box in your match that just pops out at the end of it, and how would you rate this game? And then you can fill out a bubble, or fill out a couple bubbles, and that's it. And then you get like, I don't know, what's a good 1,500 BP? And that might be even too little, 2,000 BP. Most people would do that, right? It's not that much. Actually, maybe not even 2,000 is a little bit too little. 10,000? Daily quests are worth 33, right? And presumably you could finish a game. Yeah, so maybe 33,000, and then you can do it 5 times. And you can get 33,000 5 times. Right? In terms of the game, 50,000 is basically like the bare minimum you need for a Blood Web. And as such, you won't even get a free Blood Web out of that, so... Most people don't think about it that way. They just go, oh my god, blood points, yay! Like, I don't even do the daily quests because it's worth so little. And most of the time, it doesn't overlap. Like, my fun is actually directly tethered to, like, my enjoyment of what I'm doing in the game. And if I have to do something I don't want to do, it's not worth the fucking 30,000 blood points to go and do it. Regardless of playing the game as a survivor or get 4 hatchet hits as Huntress or something stupid like that, it's honestly just not even worth doing it if I don't feel like playing Huntress during the day. I don't know if a lot of people are in that boat, but I literally do not touch the daily quests at all because they aren't worth my time. You can't change them. I think you can change out some of them now. I'm not sure though, but generally not worth it. And most of the stuff I don't like enjoy playing the killers. It's not like get 4 hooks either. It's not something generic. It's like usually play a certain killer and then hit them with a specific item from that killer, and then you get blood points for it or something stupid like that, or 4 unhooks as a survivor. But anyways, one of the biggest problems just right out of the gates that they did with this game, and this is not just BHVR, by the way. A lot of development companies do not have a way of getting feedback directly from their game, and that's unfortunate. Oh my god, 60,000 BP. Oh god, that's so much. That's actually a decent amount. That's 1 blood web. That's actually a meaningful amount at this point. That's like 1 blood web. I thought they were around 33. But anyways, like one of the problems that big game development companies have is the fact that they literally do not get feedback from their game. And the feedback you're going to find on this forum is going to be very skewed in a very specific manner because the only people that are willing to come to the forums to post on the forums about a game that they try to have fun in their off time when they aren't working, are generally the very sweaty people. These are not normal people. These are not the casuals that are going to show up here. Myself being one of them, and I stream this game basically for one of my jobs. I stream this game for my jobs, and I didn't even take time to fill out a fucking discussion each and every day. That being said, I was really sick for the first couple tests here in March. I don't think we played until the 4th. I didn't play the test until the 4th. I played on Saturday. This is when I was really sick. I was on vacation, then I played, and I was really sick for these couple days, and I played on the 4th. So the 4th onward, I was playing the PTB, or the tests. But just like looking at the patch notes, which we're going to go over here in a second, it's always going to stand out that there's things wrong with what they're doing and what they're attempting to do. But then they're also on the right track. So, and I'll agree with their overall assessment, which is you have people that want to shit on other people because they consider it fun, and then you have people that don't want to be shit on because they don't consider it fun. It's 2 specific groups. They don't word it that way. They have high MMR players that want to have loose games so they can shit on people, and then you have low casual players, low MMR casual players that don't want to be shit on. And once again, there's a reason that SBMM exists. You'll have people saying, no, SBMM shouldn't be in any video game, but those are just fucking people that want to show off on Twitch and look good in front of people, because it's really easy to do. And most people, as we mentioned earlier, just don't give a they can't see skill. Most people cannot see when people are skilled. They can't see how easy stuff is. They just look for final results, like someone is dead, right? Someone is dead or someone's alive. Yeah. Stuff that is very, very easy to understand and very easy to parse. So it doesn't matter what region people are playing on. It doesn't matter how long the queues... Well, queues kind of take, because that's enjoyment, right? So queues being faster and, they want a faster queue. They don't care about a fair and balanced game. And that being said, a lot of people that are playing the game can't even tell whether or not the game's fair and balanced. They just know if they died or not, right? That's what it basically comes down to, and one of the reasons I hook Camp and Tunnel is because survivors don't give a shit about the amount of blood points I get. They don't care how many hooks I get. They just care whether or not they escape or not. That's it. The game is just about escaping or not. So people there go, oh no, it's about the number of chases you have and how long they take, and let's 1v1 and go against each individual person and stop, like, lock the gens while this is happening, so, you know, they don't get the gens done too fast. You know, it's just, yeah, that's, the game's literally about killing people, and that's it. However you get it done. But we're gonna take a look at the patch notes here, guys. I'm kind of getting ahead of myself, and this is gonna make more sense when we add context here. And I'm not gonna read all this to you, but I do have an add-on. I'm pretty sure I have this already. Let's see. Pretty sure this is already. Let's see. What's going on here?
Google Cloud Text-to-Speech enables developers to synthesize natural-sounding speech.
Over the past few weeks, we've run a series of short matchmaking tests based on various feedback we've received.
And obviously it has to
These
be
range
with the
from
UK
making
accent.
the matchmaker faster, stricter, various combinations in between, and yes, even disabling skill-based matchmaking and reverting to the old. Over the past few weeks, we've run a series of short matchmaking tests based on various feedback we've received. These ranged from making the matchmaker faster, stricter, various combinations in between, and yes, even disabling skill-based matchmaking and reverting to the old grade-based matchmaking. We want to start by thanking everyone who took the time to share their thoughts about each of the tests. While we're able to track things like queue times behind the scenes, your feedback is invaluable when it comes to finding extraordinary cases and for getting an idea of how these changes
UK
feel
news
rather than how
anchor is
they
the best,
perform.
so.
Thank you. We've kept the details of the tests a secret until now as to not influence feedback, but since the tests are over, we're ready to dive in and share some details on what was tested. But first, we need to explain what each of the changes mean.
You just want me to say stuff.
Fair warning, this is going to be a long and very technical one. We have a bunch of settings which we can tweak behind the scenes. Here's a quick rundown on the ones we changed during the tests. The first is maximum range. When you search for a match, we try to find other players who are close to your rating, within 50 points. We have a bunch of settings which we can tweak behind the scenes. Here's a quick rundown on the ones we changed during the tests. The first is maximum range. When you search for a match, we try to find other players who are close to your rating, within 50 points. If we aren't able to do so, the search gradually expands until we're able to find you a match. By default, this is set to 500 points away from your own rating. This is so you're guaranteed to get a match after waiting a while, though it may not be the fairest.
Notice how they don't tell you the range of the matches. They don't tell you the maximum and minimum. So they said 500 points away. If it's based on the earlier system, by the way, if it's based on the earlier leaks from last year, which was, they said the minimum MMR is 1100, I believe, and the maximum MMR is 1900. That means there's an 800 point range between the minimum and maximum. That's a really fucking huge swath of players that they originally allowed you to queue into. If it's based on the MMR from last year that was leaked. We're going to assume it is. So that's 2/3 of the player base, or 2/3 of the matchmaking rank, their rating systems, 2/3 of the matchmaking rating system that you're matched with, which allows your games to flex pretty good, relatively decent amount. Yeah, I won't, for instance, get the bare. If you're at the maximum MMR, I won't get the bare minimum, but I also will get people that are around the center, right? I'll get around the center and then higher MMR.
The second is expansion time. This is how long it takes to reach the maximum range. By default, this is set to 5 minutes. Then we have a few switches we can toggle. These are bidirectional matchmaking. Normally, once one player has been waiting long enough, other players can be pulled into their match, as long as they're within the maximum range. Bidirectional matchmaking requires both players to have expanded enough to encompass each other for them to be pulled into the same match. By default, this is off. If this sounds confusing, don't worry.
I don't even understand why that's a thing,
Here's
by the
a
way.
little
We'll talk
chart
about
to
that in
clear
a bit.
things up.
Anyways, they're showing ranges and showing how you can actually hit between the two different ranges. I'm not exactly sure why this has a bigger range than this guy. If this is supposed to be an example of bidirectional matchmaking or matchmaking in general. I assume this is bidirectional matchmaking. So this just means if you have an expanded range, it allows two people to end up inside the MMR of each other's range, right? Once again, not very certain on why this is a thing, which we'll discuss later.
Each player's actual rating is shown in red, and the current matchmaking search is shown in blue. In example 1, player A's search has expanded to cover player B, but player B has not yet expanded to cover player A, so they won't be matched together. In example 2,
Okay. Unless I have the widget open, it doesn't read the whole thing.
in example 2, both players have expanded enough to cover each other, so they can now be matched together. When we use the default unidirectional matchmaking, both examples would be eligible for a match. Grade visibility, this one's nice.
The fuck? Okay.
12. The April update, iridescent shards re-Leatherface. We have issued iridescent shards. Grade visibility, this one's nice and simple. We can switch off grades in the post-match screen since they typically
Something I
aren't
said
used
should
for
have been done
matchmaking.
a long time ago.
This doesn't actually have
It
an
should
effect,
be replaced
but
with
we
player
were curious
portraits.
to see how people feel about it and how it
So I don't
affects
need
their
to fucking
perception of
cross-reference the spreadsheet.
grade-based matchmaking. We can switch off skill-based matchmaking entirely and instead use grades for matchmaking. For folks who joined us recently, this is roughly how the matchmaking worked before the introduction of skill-based matchmaking.
But it's not exactly the same because you can't DMMR right now, so you just have a bunch of people that are outside of their range. And they talk about it in a little bit. Is there a way that I can actually just show it all the time? Yeah. Guess not.
The tests, and now, the part you've been waiting for, just what exactly was tested each day. We'll also share our expectations and how they matched up to the results. Quick disclaimer, we'll be talking a lot about averages in this section. If this doesn't line up with your experiences, don't worry, we're aware that things can vary depending on a bunch of different factors, time, region, role, rating, etc.
Region?
For the first 3 tests, we did not expect much of an improvement. These 3 were meant to test individual variables and see the effect they have on matchmaking. Afterwards, we started to mix these variables to see the impact they would have together. March 28th test, expansion time decreased to 1 minute from 5 minutes. Expectation, faster matches, particularly for players in off-peak times, though the quality of matches would be lower. Results, as expected, wait times dropped significantly across the board.
It's the same thing,
faster than
MMR,
any other
SPMM,
day,
same
especially for
same
the
stuff,
players
you
on the
will.
extreme ends of the ratings
It's just a
spectrum.
way of
The
wording
quality of
competitive
matches
or
on average did not change a whole lot, though some players may
rating
have
system.
noticed a larger gap
It
in
doesn't
skill
matter.
levels. Kill rates noticeably changed on the ends of the spectrum, with high-rated killers becoming more deadly and low-rated killers having a harder time. This is likely due to players on the ends of the spectrum being paired with more players from the middle.
Yeah, so they made it looser. Essentially, this turns into MMR being looser. It's not exactly the same thing. But once again, expansion time should really only influence regions that have almost no players playing in it. It still matters, especially to those regions, but you shouldn't be basing your test results specifically off those regions. I hope they aren't. Like, for instance, UK Ireland has almost no one playing in it, but a lot of the streamers are from there, which is one of the reasons that I have a lot of problem with there being an Ireland server is because they're too stupid to understand that they're on an Ireland server and alone and not paired with the rest of Europe, because Europe is really fucking big if you're looking at mainland. And mainland all plays on Frankfurt, and they will not play on Ireland, UK, because of the time it takes to get across. It's not in UK, it's not in London, by the way. Even though AWS, so Amazon, has a server in London, they don't use it. They use the Ireland server in Dublin. So what that means is in order for mainland Europe to get across, it's probably easier if I show you guys a map here, which I have. I need to use a special, hey, don't dox me, bro, Google Maps. Okay. So if you look at how the internet is a series of tubes, as Al Gore put it, what that means there's a lot of interconnection points. London, and Ireland way over here, is specifically separate from mainland Europe. In order to get to London, let's say if you're Madrid, you have to go here and you have to go across, or to get to Dublin. You have to go over here and you have to go across the strait. There is a backbone, a fiber backbone line that goes across the water right here to get to Ireland. All the cables that seemingly come across from the Atlantic, go into like Manchester. They're somewhere around here, northern or southern UK. So basically, I come in like over here. And going to London, for instance, for me, is basically the same amount of time as if I went to Ireland. That means there's almost no difference in ping time. If you're in mainland Europe, you will never play in Dublin, because in order for you to play in Dublin, that means you have to go along this tiny little stretch here. And Frankfurt is right over here. So the only way that the only way that Dublin, the Dublin server, would be closer is if you're like right over here on the edge, or if you're maybe kind of near London. From my experience, if you connect to London or around this vicinity, you will generally always get Ireland, but occasionally you'll get Frankfurt. The ping difference between connecting to the Frankfurt server and the Ireland server, if you live in London, is roughly 2 to 3 ms. That's nothing. It is absolutely nothing. There's no reason this server should exist. What the server does, however, is segment this portion of the UK, or this portion of EU, away from the rest of the players. And basically is what this amounts to. And players will obviously not completely, related to population size, because certain areas are going to have more people that are playing games than other areas of the world, right? That's just the way it is. It's very safe to say this is a small fractional amount of population compared to the rest of Europe. It is. This is about 12% of the if you include Ireland and Europe, UK together, they're about 12% of the size of Europe. So next to nothing. There's next to no players here. There's about 70 million people here, and the rest of Europe has about 460 million, I think it is, people. So obviously the rest of Europe is going to have a lot more people that are playing on Frankfurt compared to Dublin, because it is where everyone's put. Just because it is faster, and the game will pick your server based on the closest server when you load the game. It does not load balance. It will not move you around to different servers based on the time of day. It will always put you on the server that's closest no matter what. It doesn't care about the amount of people they're playing, because this game does not really have a load balancing system built in for player base. That's just the way it is. NA, on the other hand, has like 640 million people. That includes Central America, that play on 2 servers. We have Virginia and Oregon. And that's putting aside the fact that Ohio and California would both better serve the populations because they'd be closer. The weird thing about this is it's not even London. AWS has a London server. They don't use it. They use the Ireland Dublin server. I don't know why. I have no idea why the server exists. If they got rid of the server, at worst case, it'd probably add maybe like 20 ms to people living in Ireland to get to Frankfurt. That's nothing. This is not a first-person shooter. It doesn't matter. If you live in London, it'll add like 2 to 3 ms. And if you live in Dublin, it adds maybe 20 ms to your ping. And we've tried this before, because I can VPN to both London and to Dublin. And the ping difference when I connect to Frankfurt is like next to nothing if I use 2 VPNs. So it doesn't matter. This is negligible. The whole reason this exists is I have no fucking idea. I think someone just left a checkbox ticked somewhere. I have no idea why it exists. But if you're in mainland Europe, if you're in any of these countries down here, you're always going to connect to Frankfurt, which is... Where's Frankfurt? Pretty central. Right there. Yeah. So Frankfurt's right over here on the side of Germany. So the chances that if you're down here in Madrid, you are definitely going to connect to Frankfurt instead of going all the way up to Dublin. It doesn't make sense. Maybe if you're in London, you might go to London server, but it's not in London. It's in Dublin. I don't know why they don't use the London server, but who knows? I don't know exactly, but there is a large, very vocal part of the streamer community that exists in Ireland and UK. You can just look at the big streamers. There's a lot of them that are from Ireland and UK, and that's just the way it is. I'm not exactly sure why that is. Maybe it's because, once again, if you're in a smaller part of the player base, it makes the games much easier. That could be why. I'm not sure, though, but it definitely very much fucks up the matchmaker. Because if you're over here, and once we talk about distributions once again, if you look at a player distribution of skill, you're going to have a majority of players that are going to be at average skill. Not on the low end and not on the high end. They're going to be somewhere in the middle. And when you don't have enough people to flush this out, that means if you have someone over here in the high end who's looking for matches, they'll have much higher probability of getting the players that they shouldn't, because the matches are going to expand and then include people that are outside their MMR rating. That's just what happens when you have a low population server. Unfortunately, the game does not tell people this. The game does not tell you that they have a Dublin server. And I mentioned before, I've talked to some streamers and they think using a VPN is illegal. They think they'll get banned for using it. They don't even respond because they don't, like, it's outside their skill set and they just don't think it matters. But this means the players over here are in a very, very, very small part of the player base. They're an incredibly small part of the player base. Maybe even you could even say like Australia. It is incredibly small and non-representative of the normal game. That also means it's much easier to stream snipe people over here, because when they're queuing, that means there's going to be no one around that range, and you can almost always get into their games. People in particular in the community that generally, because of the way that they represent themselves and talk, and it's partly their fault, but also people are just assholes. True is one of the people that definitely gets stream sniped a shitload and has very different games than normal people. That's just because he queues to the Dublin server instead of the Frankfurt server, and it makes it much easier for people to get into his games. I've mentioned it to him. I tweeted at him. I tried to say it in chat. He just ignores it, so that's basically on him. But if he queued to the Frankfurt server, he would have a lot more people to queue with, right? But he doesn't. So, I don't know. Just games over here are going to be much easier if you queue during mainstream hours. It's simply because there's not enough people playing. That's just the way it is. And why this server exists, I don't know. I've made a Reddit thread. I've tweeted at BHVR. I made posts on their forums twice about it. It still exists. I don't know why it's there. They don't respond to it. Yeah, I have no fucking idea, but it definitely fucks with their metrics, because they're going to have people over here. Not necessarily it's going to fuck with they can see, for instance, where people are queuing from, right? But people that are queuing can't see where they're queuing from because they don't know what server they're on. They don't know that they're in a minority of the player base. And what that means is you have a strong vocal part of the community that is from UK and Ireland, and they have a much louder voice in the community than everyone else. And people tend to listen to people that are talking. It doesn't matter what they're saying. The more people that are watching, the more think that they're going to think that they're just right? That's just the way it works nowadays. It just turns into upvotes and likes and people just like eyeballs. It doesn't even matter if they're right or not. And as I mentioned before, they don't seem to know or care that they're in a minority of the player base. But it will influence people, whether or not people think they're having fun. If they go watch their streamer and their streamer's not having fun, or their streamer says, wow, this is so much fun, yay, wahoo, stuff like that, they're going to think that it's the MMR test is great. They won't actually think for themselves. They'll just go, oh my god, this is so good. My big streamer is saying so. Oh my god, Streamer Daddy is telling me it's so fun. It is so fun right now. I know it. I haven't even played the game, but I know it's so because my streamer told me so. It doesn't even matter. And unfortunately, this is on BHVR once again, and one of the things they're doing wrong is they have a fucking Dublin server, and then they did an MMR test, and you have a bunch of people screaming that things might not be fair. They're not fair at all, because they're in a very small portion of the player base, which does not represent the overall game or the state of the game, right? If they were queuing to Frankfurt, maybe it would, but they weren't. I checked during the MMR test to see if the Ireland server was still running, and it was. I'm pretty sure it's still running right now. We could even go check it again. I did a stream on it. I have a video on it. I've did everything I could about this, but I feel the need to talk about this because when they're talking about stuff like this and they want subjective feedback, and then they're depending on people's opinions, but people's opinions are skewed based on streamers or vocal people in the community, they really have to consider what they're doing. And once again, this is another reason that they shouldn't be using like reports on their forums, and they should have had a pop-out widget or a bigger box that says, hey, we're doing a test right now, please rate this game, and it gives you 30,000 BP, right? And you can do it 5 times. People would do that, and assumingly, 5 games probably isn't outside the scope of normal people playtime. So you could have made five different rewards for the test for the day and given it to people, and they didn't. I don't know why they didn't do that. Like, they just literally just threw away part of their data that they could have gotten. People are willing to fill like 5 bubbles. That's not hard. You have 5 questions with 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 bubbles, right? And you just, I strongly agree, or I strongly disagree, and I strongly agree, right? And you have everything in between, and then you maybe have an NA, not applicable, if you don't care, right? And don't punish people for clicking all the NA, because you'd rather know people don't give a shit than people pretending that they give a shit and then just filling out random results, right? So I don't know why they didn't do that, but they didn't. So they threw away basically part of their data set because they just didn't care enough to do something like that. I'm not sure why. And a lot of this is just depending now, once again, on kill rates is what they're looking at now. And yeah, I guess because survivors will, like, despite what people say in the community, survivors will try, at high MMR, survivors will try to save each other because they want to win. And if they don't save each other, they die. That's just the way it goes. You can't just do gens. If you do that, you might be one of the lucky 2 or lucky 1 that gets out based on the games that I play, but at high MMR, but maybe not. And that's why people will try to save each other and they'll try to help each other out. Anyways, let's continue on with this. So the expansion time is a big deal if you live in an area with almost no players in it, and expansion time will make the player base fluctuate a lot. I believe, if I recall right, True said this was probably one of the best tests he had was on the first day. And the reason for that is because he's getting games with shitters in it. Yeah, he's getting games with people that aren't around his MMR because the game has expanded a lot, because it's at a 1-minute time interval instead of 5 minutes. It's expanded a lot to give you a faster queue. Queue times I don't think matters. 5 minutes is probably still within, I'd say queue time should be around 3 minutes maximum. I don't think 1 minute is enough, and I think 5 minutes is a little bit too much for people to wait. Count matches are different. This is not count matches. I'd say probably 3 minutes is where you want to be before things expand a lot. And we'll get a sec to expansion time here in a bit, because they don't actually go, even though they said this is technical, it's not, because they don't give you time intervals here. And I'm going to assume some things, and I think a lot of people are assuming some things here. And we're gonna go back over this after we go through the nitty gritty here.
March 29th test, maximum range decreased to 250 from 500. Expectation.
So this is lowering, as you saw earlier, it is the range of the MMR that players are operating in. They lowered it to 250 from 500. So it made the games extremely sweaty.
Slower matches, especially for players with extraordinarily low ratings and or in off-peak hours, but higher quality matches in general. Results, like we predicted,
what's considered a high quality match?
Players on either end of the spectrum, although players in the middle did not have a noticeable impact on matchmaking times, on average. Overall, this test only slightly reduced the average rating difference compared to a non-test day, though curiously, players on the far ends of the spectrum may have seen an increase. March 30th test, enable bidirectional matchmaking. Expectation, longer queue times for players in off-peak hours and players at the extreme end of the rating spectrum, but fairer matches for players that get matched quickly. Results, longer queue times were an understatement. Some players were experiencing exceptionally long
Ireland.
queue
I heard about this
times,
from Ireland streamers,
plus.
UK streamers. They're talking about the long match
there
times.
weren't enough players to match them against
because it's
in their
fucking in a
region
player
and
base
skill
that has
level
no
at the
one in
time
it.
they were playing,
Why does it
and
exist?
players
I
who
don't
were
fucking
close
know.
enough to their skill level would not get matched with them unless they also were unable to find a match. This is longer than we'd ever like anyone to wait.
Yeah.
To play it safe,
That's like
we
comp
cut
game
this
time.
test short and altered it a few hours in. A hard cap was added to switch back to the default unidirectional matchmaking after someone had been waiting for 5 minutes. This cap was used for all future tests where bidirectional matchmaking was used. Of all the tests, this one reduced the average rating difference the most, cutting it by roughly a third. However, the long queue times make this a fairly unappealing solution. March 31st test, maximum range decreased to 250 from 500, expansion time decreased to 1 minute from 5 minutes.
This is really weird.
Expectation, players who already get quick.
So they made the range tighter, which means you need to wait longer for people to end up in the range, and then they increased the expansion time, how fast it expands, which means it isn't going to wait. That just seems really dumb, but
matches may notice a slight drop in quality, but players on the far ends may find matches quicker. On the other hand, the lowered range may limit the pool of players to match with on the far ends of the rating spectrum. Results: queue times for survivors were faster across the board, but killer queue times had no noticeable difference. In terms of kill rates, on the mid-high end of skill groups, kill rates dropped slightly, closer to 50%, while the lower groups remained mostly the same. This test also earned the second biggest reduction in average rating difference of all the tests.
Average rating difference. What is average rating difference? Just the difference between the two players. This isn't subjective. So notice once again how they aren't talking about subjective reception of the MMR test for the most part. Because once again on the forums, there's almost no responses there. And they didn't let people fill out a form in the game. So, yeah, you don't really... Yeah, they just threw away part of their part that they really wanted was a subjective interpretation of how the matchmaker's working, how fun it is, right? Which is generally related to performance. And you can make some loose correlations there, right, between performance, like how good a side did, and whether or not they enjoyed themselves. Because people usually just say, "Oh my god, this game's so much fun," because I shit all over players. That's basically the way it goes. Because people are too stupid to understand that when they're shitting all over someone, basically that's another person that's getting shot on, right? Like that's the whole reason SBMM exists, is so people at the ultra low end can actually enjoy themselves too. But yeah. They basically threw a part of their rating here, which is a subjective interpretation, so whether or not people found it fun or they thought the match was fair. There isn't any of that. They got the forum responses, which are just all over the place, and once again, you have to understand there's a very select group of individuals that are coming to the forum. There's also going to be a lot of people that literally just rely on whatever streamers say for their opinion on something, because most people don't think for themselves. Yeah, this is kind of weird. I don't know why they do this. So they made the match tighter, and then at the same time, they made it easier to find matches for people in basically low population areas. These actually seem like two different aspects here. Expansion time should not actually be something that should even be messed with. And the reasoning for this is because if you live in an area with a bunch of outliers, that's not something the BHVR should be looking at, because it's not going to be representative of an actual well fleshed out player base. And you can still have fast, this is just basically quality of life. Expansion time is essentially quality of life on how long someone has to wait before they find a match before they get bored, right? So you could even say that this shouldn't matter, and then they should just exclude areas that have a certain amount of players that are playing that, there's not enough people. And you're just going to assume that matches will be unbalanced in that area. That's just the way that's going to go. Instead, you should look at areas that have well fleshed out player bases, which is generally NA, mainland Europe. I don't know how Asia is because I've never been over there, and I don't watch any streamers from Asia, but maybe Asia's all right too. I'm not sure. But look at areas with well-fleshed out player base. Expansion time really should have been a variable that they didn't even mess with, because it's just something that will fuck up their end results here at the end of the day, like their actual range in which they want to look at how players function in this range. And then you look at the skewed data from, let's say, Ireland. You look at the skewed data from Ireland, in which the expansion time was really short. Why does the Ireland area even matter if you already understand that that area is basically a small subset of players? And they could fix it too. They could get rid of the Ireland server, but once again, they don't. I don't know. I don't understand why they included expansion time in here. It's something, obviously represents the quality of life issue, but you can assume that in areas with a flushed out player base, you're going to get games fast enough, and outside of the area is going to fall into areas where it just doesn't matter at all. I'm not sure, but they did it in basically all their tests. They kept messing with the expansion time. And once you get the expansion time is so short that if you live in an area with almost no one playing, once again, in areas with no population. For instance, I was watching Winter earlier tonight, and he was getting games right till 9, and he's like, the fucking players are literally all over the board in terms of player skill. And that's not necessarily want to be. I mean, he likes it because he's getting more games, right? But he's going to get players that are outside of his MMR. That being said, also the bidirectional thing I think is supposed to help with that. But once again, it only depends if people have been waiting long enough that they're going to end up in that queue. Which we'll talk a bit about this in a second. We're getting ahead of ourselves because there's a bunch of tests we got to cover.
April 4th test, maximum range decreased to 350
which is where it is now.
from 500, expansion time decreased
So
to 1
instead
minute
of being
from 5
2/3 of the player base, it's now a third of the player base, or a third of the matchmaking rank.
Matchmaking may be slower for some players, but the quality of matches should be improved. Results, survivor queue times were faster across the board, while killer queue times remained mostly the same, with the exception on the far low end of skill ratings. Kill rates, meanwhile, climbed slightly at the highest skill levels and remained mostly unchanged at the lower end. The average rating difference didn't decrease noticeably with this test. April 7th test, maximum range decreased to 350 from 500, expansion time decreased to 1 minute from 5 minutes, enable bidirectional matchmaking, grades hidden expectation, more or less the same results as the previous test, as all the variables are the same.
This is funny.
Results, we were curious to see what kind of impact hiding grades would have on the feedback we received, since grades are no longer used for matchmaking, though they can give the impression that they're a measure of skill. For this test, we ran all the same variables.
There's so many people that still think grade is rank.
This way we could compare feedback to the previous test to see how grades affected the sentiment. To our surprise, the overall feedback appeared slightly more positive with grades hidden. When directly comparing opinions from folks who left feedback on both the April 4th and 7th tests, we discovered that the feedback was usually the same if not better when grades were hidden.
No shit.
We opted to leave grades hidden over the weekend.
Yeah, and now they're still hidden, by the way. No fucking shit, because it doesn't matter. Because people didn't get the memo that grades are basically playtime now. And the game still shows you grades. They could have changed it to a number. Why didn't they change it to a number? I don't know. I have no idea, but instead they use the same system, probably because it was easy, by the way. They use the same system when they could have instead, you know that little insignia that shows your playtime? They could have used that instead, right? If they want to show your level, like your rank, like your general player or whatever in like Battlefield or whatever, they could have done that. But instead they made the system exactly the same, and then people got confused because they wanted to reuse assets once again because their programmers tend to be lazy, from what I understand. From what I've seen, they tend to be lazy, and that's a shame. That's really a shame. This is curious.
April 11 to 12 test, switch to grade-based matchmaking. April 12th only, show grades. These tests were added later as we started to see more speculation about the tests. Occasionally someone would predict that one of the things we were testing was the old matchmaking system, and we figured, hey, why not give it a shot? Expectation, matches would have a lot more variety in player skill, very similar to the old rank-based matchmaking. We also expected to see the average grade difference to fall dramatically. Result, as we suspected, reports of one-sided matches started flooding in. We can also confirm this on our end. The average kill rates for this day saw the most dramatic change yet, with the highest skill levels rocketing up to roughly 80%, greater than 3 kills per match on average, and plummeting to around 20%, less than 1 kill per match on average, on the lower end of the spectrum. The average grade difference, however, decreased significantly, as expected. Now to be clear, this is not quite the same as the old rank-based matchmaking. For starters, grades reset all the way back to bronze I, while ranks only reset one color tier, and it's not possible to lose grades anymore. We wanted to give it a fair shot, so we specifically set this test as close to the grade reset as possible to give people the largest window to settle into the grades. This is also why the last day was cut short. We didn't want to leave the test running over the grade reset, since that would have everyone matches against anyone. Furthermore, a 1 to 2 day test is not the same as leaving it on for an extended period of time. Given more time, and the ability to lose grades, we expect that people facing far too difficult opponents would eventually have the grades drop to a place where they're more comfortable, while folks who are consistently overperforming would climb. Ultimately, though, this highlights a big issue with using grades or ranks for matchmaking. A very experienced player who just hasn't played a lot lately can very easily be paired against players that are new to the game. As we've learned in the past, grades, ranks are a stronger indicator of playtime than skill. This test was very polarizing, but interestingly, we started to see more positive feedback when we started showing grades again. This indicates that there's definitely a strong connection between seeing grades in the post-match screen and the sentiment about a match.
You don't fucking say. You don't fucking say. Weird how people end up just looking at something and they knee-jerk react to it. It's like they're testing a fucking placebo or something. Hey guys, take a look at this fucking grade. Oh my god, it looks like you're like they could have just randomized people's grades or something. just randomize their MMR, and it would probably like directly reflect their ability to like how good they think they're doing in the match. Like they could have just changed the emblems to all the same color and only for them, and then everyone thinks that they're actually just facing against players that are the same rank of them or something. Like it wouldn't even matter. Okay, I mean that literally proves that people literally just look at something and they just think that's what that's what's happening in the game, right? That's no secret. Everyone's noticed that. Like I've run into people that will at least like pretty often, periodically, like every other day, I'll run into people that think that their grade is their rank and that they're getting matched with people of low rank like an Ashe, and that player is going to be bad because they're an Ashe. MMR in the game has nothing to do with their rank in any way, shape, or form. It has nothing to do with your rank or grade. I mean, it's correlation because probably if you play a lot, you'll probably be relatively decent, but the ranks don't reset anymore. They don't. You don't derank down a tier, and as such, that means that it's not going to be a good MMR system. The rank system was an MMR system prior to the current one. It was what you consider an MMR system because it had criteria for you to actually rank up, and if you didn't meet the criteria, you would rank down. Different than what's happening in the game, and one of the problems, which we will talk about here in a second, one of the current problems with the game is the fact that survivors are generally based on whether or not they escape or not. They said they're going to change it here, and once again, I'm getting ahead of myself, but that's actually a big deal. Killers, not so much, because killer survivors will try to save people. That's part of like the built-in nature of the game, as like survivors will try and save people.
Learnings: we've learned that the strictness of the matchmaking and the quality of the matches is without a doubt linked. Looser conditions had a notable effect on kill rates, opponent variety, and also the feedback we received. While the larger variety in opponents was appreciated by some, there was an opposite reaction from others who were now struggling in tougher matches. Simply put, on the other side of any casual match where one player can win without trying is a person who's having a bad time despite trying their best. On the other hand, the inverse is also true. Stricter matchmaking brought the kill rates closer to the middle, but many found the matches to be too competitive to enjoy. While folks in the lower groups of skill rating would have fewer unfair matches, the higher end of skill groups ended up in tough matches filled with meta perks and killers. These tests overall highlighted two distinct groups: high-skill players who want more variety in their matches, lower mid-skill players who, understandably, don't want to get destroyed by high-skill players. The biggest takeaway here is that going too far either way is never a one-size-fits-all solution. What we'd often notice is how some players loved a particular test because they were seeing more variety in their opponents, but at the same time, those same tests were also frustrating to a lot of people who were suddenly getting matched with people way better than them. Neither person is wrong in this scenario, each of them just expects something different from matchmaking. Lastly, we have discovered that hiding grades on the post-match screen definitely influences the feedback we receive. We suspect this is for two reasons. One, long-time players who may have missed the matchmaking changes could still thinking that grades are used for matchmaking.
You don't
and
say.
Two, some players still feel like grades are an indicator of skill in spite of not being used for matchmaking. Most importantly, however, we found that there was a lot of support for hiding grades, so this is something we'll be considering as a permanent change.
Should just be replaced with the player portrait, so you know who you're talking to. I still don't know why their names are there. Like every MOBA you play, it has like the character name and then the player name, right? So you could figure out who you're talking to based on their in-game avatar, not specifically based on who they are outside of the game, which you don't give a shit about, right? Because honestly, I don't care if they'd replace their usernames with Claudette222 or Dwight530, right? It doesn't matter. I don't care who I'm talking to. I don't care what their username is. For some strange reason, people still seem to think people care about their username. I don't. I guess you don't want to be another just, nameless entity in the vast sea of people right online, but that's the way it works. And because it doesn't matter. The only time it generally matters is when you get like a stick up your ass and it goes too far, right? Where you start stalking people or fucking around with them. You know their Twitch channel, and then you get a chip on your shoulder and you want to go fuck with their Twitch channel. Like, it doesn't matter to me. Which is one of the reasons if there was a streamer mode, I'd just turn it on and I wouldn't look back. I don't care. I don't care about the people I'm playing against. I don't care what their username is. That's just part that people seem to think people care about, and I don't. I don't care who the rando is across the internet. But for some strange reason, people need to get that. They need that little bit where people care, right?
Next steps. With all these learnings in mind, we have a solution that will improve matchmaking for both groups of players. We will be making the following changes shortly: reducing the maximum range, reducing the expansion time proportionally, so it's no faster or slower than before. Lowering the effective cap for skill ratings, removing grades from the post-match screen for the foreseeable future. Why these changes? As mentioned in the learnings, we found two dominant groups: high-skill players who want more variety, lower mid-skill players who want even matches. In order to make both groups happy, we first need to isolate them from each other. To do this, we'll reduce the maximum expansion range. This will help keep players of similar skill levels together, reducing the number of one-sided matches. The majority of players fall in the middle of the spectrum, so there is still plenty of people to match with. Additionally, since it seems like the expansion is happening at a good rate, we'll be adjusting the expansion time proportionally. Next, we need to consider how this will affect the high-skill group. Reducing the range would mean less variety. Fortunately, we have another variable to tweak that solves this issue perfectly. For the purposes of matchmaking, we have a cap for skill ratings. Although your rating can continue to climb beyond this cap, you'll be treated as if you're at the cap for the purposes of matchmaking. This is in place to prevent the best players out there from climbing to a point where there's simply nobody to match with. By lowering this cap, we're able to expand the...
This is not a true ELO system, by the way. This is not a true MMR system, and the reason I mention this is because it's based off constant rates. You get 25 MMR, assuming it's the same as it was last fall during the leaks. You get 25 MMR as a killer for getting a 3K, and you get 50 MMR as a killer for 4K. It does not matter what skill opponents you're going against, and it doesn't matter for the opponents you're going against. It doesn't matter what your skill is either. In an ELO system, you give and take points depending on where you are. In a weighted system, you give and take points depending on who your opponents are and how easy they are, how far up the MMR chain they are, or how low. So if the matchmaker expands far enough where you're included in a match with players that are much higher skill than you and you win against them, you get a lot of ELO from it, right? If you're playing League of Legends or HOTS or I don't actually know how Apex had a kind of a weird system. Fortnite and with SBMM. If you're playing against people that have a high MMR, if you do well against these players that have high MMR, you're awarded more with more MMR. You're rewarded with more ELO points because you went against an opponent that's much higher than you, and as such, it'll move you up a rank because that means that you were at too low of a rank compared to your actual skill, right? Dead by Daylight does not have an ELO system. It has a constant system where they have a very specific point total that's added and subtracted from your rating depending on whether or not how you do in the match. For a killer, it's based on the number of kills you get. As a survivor, it's based on whether or not you survive or not. They're changing it slightly. Once again, getting ahead of myself, but adding a nuance.
Players in high skill matches, leading to more variety in the opponents you face. One match may be very close and competitive, but the next may be a little more laid back. This will also ensure that queue times don't grow longer at higher skill levels. Lastly, we'll be removing grades from the post-match screen. When we originally hit grades during the test, we saw a lot of people asking for this to be made permanent. Additionally, long-time players who may have missed the news could often think that grades were still used for matchmaking.
There's people that don't even listen to the
like
news.
The match was less fair than it actually was. These,
that didn't really tell you in the game either.
Positive feedback during the tests while they were disabled, were enough of a reason for us to disable them for the foreseeable future.
No shit.
For the future, we're still hard at work implementing various improvements to the matchmaking system. These include making survivor ratings team-based rather than personal, so dying heroically to save everyone else isn't as punishing, and improvements to backfilling lobbies to prevent players from outside of the acceptable range from being pulled in. These improvements will take longer to implement, but rest assured, work is already underway on them. You can find a full list of changes we're looking into in our January developer update. Once again, we want to thank everyone who took the time to leave feedback throughout the tests. Understanding not just how the matchmaker performs, but also how it feels is incredibly important for us to make improvements. As always, we'll be keeping a close eye on the matchmaking system moving forward and making small adjustments as necessary. Please keep the feedback coming. The Dead by Daylight team.
Aw. If they cared about the feedback, once again, they would be asking for feedback in the game, and they don't do that. For whatever reason.
12. The April update. Iridescent shards re-Leatherface. We
Go away, extension. Bye-bye, extension. Bye-bye. So there's a lot to cover here, guys. But mainly, one of the biggest takeaways here was definitely that they're combining ranges with expansion time. Expansion time really only matters in areas with essentially no one in it. 5 minutes is kind of long. I'd say 3 minutes probably should be the maximum, and they decrease it. I think they said at the end here they decrease it to 1 minute. They're going to leave it at 350 for the MMR difference, and then I believe they said they reduced the expansion time to 1 minute. Here we go. So they reduce the maximum range and then reduce the expansion time proportionally, which I assume if they're going to 350, that means they prorated it to like 3 minutes, maybe? Because 350 is not half of 500. That's like 66%. So maybe 66% of the expansion time would be 3 minutes-ish, 5 minutes, 3.5, 330 or something like that. Yeah. So kind of curious here is the expansion time in general. It sounds like literally it goes from this to this instantaneously at exactly 5 minutes. So it will wait 5 minutes and it doesn't ratchet up. Normally in an MMR system it'll ratchet up. It sounds, this is based on an assumption because they didn't explain it here, and it's just, you have to go off an assumption here, but based on what we're seeing here and what they talked about is the expansion time itself should gradually increase. It shouldn't just be like this and then like this. This makes it easier to program. But in terms of an MMR, it should be gradually increasing like this, right? Your range should be gradually increasing until it finds a game. And it's not. So they changed it from 5 minutes where it goes like this to then 1 minute where it goes like this to this. And I'm not exactly sure why. Like, they could make it so that your maximum range, for instance, at 5 minutes would just be ratcheted up every 30 seconds beyond a minute. Your range increases, right? And then it'll start expanding your range slowly over time. We'll just keep adding ticks to it as it expands. I think this is just easier for them to program and easier for them to understand, but it's not where you want to be because there could be people that will fall inside this rating within the time ratio and they'll be closer together. So a more linear expansion of MMR would actually be better for their game. But for some reason they just have it set to go from this to this, and I'm not exactly sure why. Just besides being easier to program. Yeah, and then there's the unidirectional thing, which is something very weird. Bidirectional matchmaking. Unidirectional and bidirectional would be pretty close to the same thing. Unidirectional would mean, if you're talking about antennas, that means the radio waves go all over the place. Bidirectional just means it goes back and forth when you're talking about, they don't even, I guess, it's just the terminology for them, right? Yeah, so what they're explaining here is when the match expands, this player right here will not gobble up this player here until their match also expands. And once again, this isn't because the range, they don't use a linear system that just scales up like this. They just go from this to this. So they have a system where you have it like 5 minutes, this will expand. This is why the queues took so long. And this guy down here has to wait 5 minutes for it to expand. That's probably not going to happen, right? Like, ever. And in order for this to actually happen, here with their bidirectional matchmaking, this guy would have to expand and this guy would have to expand. And once again, I think this is just trying to put a band-aid on their broken system. Comparatively, where you could just have this guy expanding and then he just, because he's been waiting longer, then when people end up, if this just constantly expands like this, he just waits till he gobbles up players in this expansion range and then he's good to go. Whoever's waiting the longest, right, will just expand constantly and then eventually it'll gobble players. But for some reason, they made a very crude system in which this player will always try to get people around their matchmake rank, right? Because they aren't expanding. And this player will be stuck waiting a really long time, which is set up to 15 minutes. Which makes sense at the high end and the lowest end of the spectrum when you're looking at a distribution of players, right? With the most players being here at the center of MMR in terms of skill level. At the lowest end and the highest end, you're going to have a bunch of outliers, and they're going to have a tough time finding games. Once again, if they had a linear expansion, they wouldn't even need to do the bidirectional matchmaking thing. Eventually, whoever's been waiting the longest will just gobble people either down here or up here. Will eventually, as this expands, will eventually gobble a group of players or people around this vicinity that they just end up in their MMR. And it doesn't matter if this guy waits for 5 minutes or he has an instant game because this guy's been waiting longer. I don't know why this is a thing, besides it's just, like, they're trying to protect the MMR, essentially, of the people down here. Right? But these guys down here are always going to have an easy time finding games, because it's assuming we have a normal distribution of players, these guys are always going to have an easier time finding games, just because they're around the middle of matchmaking rank. You aren't always going to have people that will be in a fair position here. And once again, it comes down to wait time versus how strict you want your MMR to be, right? But yeah, like, they just base this purely on, like, they have a preset range instead of an expanding range, where they went from 500, this was 250, this is very tight. So they went from 500, and now they're down to 350. And 500 points would have encompassed like this. They didn't say what the minimum and maximum was. They just said range decreased from 250 to 500. They don't actually give you a meaningful measurement of these metrics. If this is based on the leaks from last year, once again, the range was 1100 to 1900, which is a difference of 800 points. That would mean 500 encompasses 2/3 of the entirety of the matchmaking rank, which would be down here, right? This would be like 2/3 of the matchmaking rank if you're at the highest MMR. You'd be down here consuming half that. But instead now you're going to be consuming the upper third of the matchmaking rank if you're at the highest MMR. Pretty weird. I'm not exactly sure why they did this. I think it's just easier for them to understand. But one of the biggest things that they threw away was the ability for players to subjectively give feedback on the system of how they had fun or not. They can't tell, even regardless of the results and how many people died, they can't tell if they've had fun or not, right? You can't tell if the survivors had fun or not. You could, if you ask 5 questions, you give 30,000 BP per day. You get 5 times they can do this, 5 games, 30,000 BP per day, and then ask 5 questions. Let's say, did you enjoy the match? How difficult did you find the match? Did you think the match was fair? There'll be 2 other ones. Did you think your teammates, well, that would work for Survivor, did you think your teammates were equally matched with your skill? You don't necessarily even need to have 5 questions. 5 questions is probably the maximum people are willing to fill out. If it's just easy, like radial buttons, it's probably the easiest thing you could do for 30,000 BP. And people would be willing to do 5, but if it's less than that, they'd still be willing to do it. Yeah, they're live. They're 100% live right now. They didn't say that they're live, I'm pretty sure, but they're definitely live right now. By the way, they made no comment about that Tuesday bullshit where there was no MMR. After the test ended on Tuesday last week, on Tuesday there was a window between like 6 p.m. and like 2 in the morning in which there was no MMR. 1 in the morning, there's 0 MMR in the game. Like, I have a video of it. It existed. There was basically no MMR in the game. And they didn't talk about that. I guess that was a whoopsie. But yeah, they didn't say that it's live, but they said going forward that they're going to do it. It's definitely live already. You can just tell based on the matches I've been getting now, the MMR is stricter. Like, I'm running into a lot of sweatier lobbies, right? Comparatively with queue times too are shorter for areas of the world that necessarily don't find the games right away, which is like EU, UK. Once again, I mentioned I watched Winter and he's getting queues into the evening, well, 4 a.m. hour in his time. I was watching him at 9. He was still getting queues relatively fast as a killer, which would be 4 a.m. 3 or 4 a.m. his time. I think UK is 6 hours ahead of where I am. Yeah, they're definitely live though, for sure. And it seems like the MMR system's also shaking out. So one thing that I also think that it changed already is players getting MMR based on whether or not their team survives rather than whether or not they survive. So basically it just gives everyone MMR or they lose MMR. Essentially like a killer. It feels like a killer, so they don't get... My guess is it's almost identical to killer. If I was trying to make an easy system here, instead of a survivor losing MMR, if they die, you have, if 2 survivors escape, no one loses any MMR or gains MMR. If 3 survivors escape, then everyone gains 25 MMR. And if 1 survivor escapes, everyone loses 25 MMR. And if 0 survivors escape, everyone loses 50 MMR, right? Because it definitely feels like we're getting some games that we're shaking out. And my guess is the team system is already in place. because that would be very easy to program compared to actually making a weighted system, which basically already existed. Like the ranking system did something like that, right? The grade system, the rank system already did that, where it give you a certain number of points based on stuff that you're doing in certain categories, and now it doesn't do that at all. Just based purely on kills. I'm pretty sure that it actually loses points if one survivor escapes. You don't even get anything. Survivors don't need to know that though, right? They just assume that they won when they escape, when they actually might just be losing MMR. So what's going to happen if that's true, by the way, is we're going to see a shift in how survivors play. At high MMR. If survivors learn that they lose MMR whenever only one person or escapes, people are not going to play for one person anymore. They're going to play for 2 escapes or no escapes, is basically what it's going to come down to. Because the 3rd escape isn't going to matter at all, right? I'm not sure I like that, but I mean, that means survivors will be more suicidal, so maybe that's a good thing. They'll try harder to get more people out. Yeah, it was... Well, I don't know. So, like, this is the funny thing. Is, like, they didn't ask for whether or not you had fun, right? I mean, they did on the forums, but that's the only place that they could get feedback. To me, right now, the MMR feels worse than it did prior to the tests. And the reason for that is it's now tighter, where sometimes I get loose games, right? Depending on the time of day I'm playing, I get loose games. Now it just feels like it's just fucking random. Well, not random, it feels like it's super tight all the time. Where we're just running the sweat squads like yesterday, and the last couple days I've been playing, like when we get around to 12:30, the games just get ultra sweaty as shit, and that's just the way that they're going. We'll see. And then I play something like Shape. And he can't handle ultra sweat squads. I don't know. As I mentioned, one of the biggest problems that they did with this test was literally throwing away the subjective feedback from survivors, or from people in general, because there is no built-in response to it in-game besides that did you have fun at the top of the screen that no one notices anymore? That still exists, which I'm sure they didn't even look at because no one uses it. Beyond that, not having a linear expansion system for their MMR rating, I think, does a disservice to them. And then survivors... Once again, whether or not the team survives or not survives, I think is way too crude for survivors. They need to have a more nuanced... They need to have a more nuanced system in which survivors are rewarded when they perform well, and then when survivors aren't doing well, then they lose points, or they're punished. I guess you could say they're punished for doing horrible, regardless of getting sucked along with their friends and then stranded at high MMR. I don't know. It's kind of curious. The whole expansion thing, by the way, not exactly like once again. This is just kind of, I don't understand. So they shifted it. 1 minute is very, very fast for Q times, by the way. They shifted it from 5 minutes to 1 minute, which really should only impact areas with low population and like basically low end times a day. I don't think this really 1 minute wait versus 3 minute. Well, this is 5 minutes is a long time. A 3 minute wait wouldn't matter that much. 3 minute wait should probably be on the higher end. But once again, if the MMR starts expanding at a minute and to encompass a bigger and bigger range, I don't think there's a problem with that. And they don't. It just seems like it's on or off. Like the expansion just happens at exactly 1 minute. Now I get matches faster than a minute, so for sure. Even prior to the tests, I almost always get matches faster than a minute. But yeah, we get basically cheaters every game, every other game. Sometimes multiple cheaters per game now. Which is what happened before with the... They definitely have tested this before, by the way. They've been tweaking things in the background, just not saying anything. High skill players want to shit on low skill players. Lower middle skill players want even matches. They don't want to get shit on by high skill players. Basically comes down to people not wanting to get shit on. This is basically the moral of the story here, and you could have figured that out well before having a test like this. High skill players just want to shit on people. Generally want to shit on people, especially if they stream on Twitch because it makes them look good. And there's a lot of people that can enjoy stuff when it's competitive, ultra competitive especially. For me, when it's too easy, it's not even fun. Like, once again, going back to last Tuesday when the MMR was completely off, the games were borderline just silly. We got 3 condemns as a Sadako. And then after that, we struggled to get 1 condemn per night. Yeah. In order to make both groups happy, we need to first isolate them from each other. That's never going to happen when they have to literally... I don't know why they said isolate. They literally have to play with each other. Like, there isn't just low MMR and high MMR, and these two never meet, right? There's overlap between MMR ratings. There's a really weird way of wording that. You can't separate them. Yeah. Well, that's why I was running Brutal Strength on him. He is very weak versus pallets. And also coup de grace. So if they don't time the loop properly, you can get a hit on them, and if it's when you're in your tier 3, you'll insta down them. That's a pretty big deal. Okay. Interesting covering this, guys. Not a lot of game developers talk about the MMR system, so it is curious learning about one, even if it's not really that amazing. And cover it. But let's move on, guys. We're going to quickly take a look at the